Now we're going to get into some linguistic stuff, so bear with me. Language defines concepts. If we don't have a word for a thing, the idea doesn't exist and can't exist until the language for it comes into being. Culture then adds value. The reaction from our environment, our caregivers, our peer group give value to our behavior. We're social creatures. In a world filled with media, stories, the tropes that are told to us again and again become normalized and expected. How many of us are living in realities that are defined by the boundaries of TV shows? Like, you do this to get that, you do this to get the guy or get the girl, and this is rude and this is okay. Value defines the connotation in language. So what is accepted behavior is constructed by our exposure and consumption, especially as children. What we see offers us possibility, things to choose from in our behavioral repertoire. Then when we combine this with what's rewarded, or what we perceive as reward, because toddlers care about intensity, not about whether like the behavior is encouraged or not. It's just about connection with the caregiver. In the same way, the discussion around gender is a discussion of language and connotation and the relationship between culture and the connotations. Once we recognize that historically and geographically that gender is a function of the language that is being spoken, it's easier to just be respectful of how humans self-identify. English just isn't well designed for gender identity. We only have he, she, and they, and that's all we have. We don't have any other way to do this. So because of the wild dual degree I took, I had room for like interesting electives, and I took a whole year on sexual diversity, and I have a lot to say. It's time for another piece of information that needs to be common knowledge. There are 3 separate things: your biological sex, your psychological gender, and your sexual orientation. These 3 things do not have a normative relationship with each other. Being male doesn't make you a man, doesn't make you straight. And it doesn't go that way. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a multiple choice test. If you want to talk about biological sex, we have to acknowledge the medical things. There's different hormone baths, there's all of that stuff that we talked about estrogen and testosterone and the reproductive system. But the general gist of how that whole XY thing, the binary one that everybody leans on, I have some things to say, because the thing that you learned about XX and XY is too simplistic, and it was in grade like 4, okay? The general gist is that when your mom and dad's egg and sperm met, there was an X that came from your mom because she was XX, and an X or a Y that came from your dad because he was an XY, and that's what makes you male or female. And there's genetic disorders, but it's a real thing, but it's a different thing. The argument that the XXXY binary proves the gender binary is crushed by the way that our bodies actually deal with what that chromosome pair. All of our DNA is tightly wound into pairs of chromosomes. The XXXY is one of the pairs. DNA is just instructions how to make molecules for the body for any situation. So DNA is just instructions made out of 4 letters, spelling out every single thing that our body could ever produce. Our DNA is just a chain of the same 4 letters in different ways. And when our body needs something, a little snippet of DNA is called out of the coil, and then that little section is copied into a piece of RNA code. Then the RNA travels to another piece of the cell, and then the cellular mechanisms convert it into a molecule of some kind that your body then uses for whatever it might need it for. So that last pair of chromosomes, let's talk about the XY. So the Y chromosome is 1/3 of the size of the X. So in females, our bodies actually alternate which X is active, moms or dads. So go on YouTube and look up why women are stripy. The Y chromosome is literally unnecessary. We don't need it. Plus, remember how testosterone and estrogen are innately linked? The truth is that it's really difficult to study the effect of biology on psychological gender because there is no direct way to observe psychology. We can only observe behavior and what people say. We can discuss sexual differentiation on a biological level with the differences in puberty between men and women. And these differences are collectively referred to as sexual dimorphia, which is kind of the same basic principle as the difference between a peacock and a peahen, right? Like the female develops these sexual traits and the male develops these sexual traits. Human genitalia develops from gonads, which are just systems of ducts that are capable of developing into either the male or the female reproductive tracts. A gene on the Y chromosome triggers an effect that transforms the gonads into testes on a male, while the X chromosome triggers the development of ovaries. Simple? Keeping up with me? The production of testes then produces testosterone and another hormone, and testosterone then induces male differentiation while degenerating the ducts that would have been female. In other words, the developing mammalian embryo is designed for a female phenotype, which is just how things express themselves, unless it's exposed to gonad testosterone at that key moment in development. Also, there are XY individuals who have a mutation that causes their bodies to be completely unresponsive to androgens. So they're phenotypically, like they're female because their bodies don't process testosterone at all. It's there, but it doesn't have any of the pathways that it's supposed to have. And in animal studies, we find that those gonad hormones affect both copulatory and social behavior on top of the sexual dimorphism puberty brain structure. And what's fascinating is that recent studies show that trans men have a total brain volume that's similar to cis men. Males have a higher brain volume, tend to statistically have a higher brain volume, not size, volume, than women. Trans men emulate that. Trans women have cortical thickness that's thicker, like cis women, because we have more folds, we hold more information. If you're confused, also let me clarify. Okay, so cis and trans are Greek prefixes that mean same side, which is what cis is, and then opposite is trans. So a cis human is one who identifies with the same gender as their biological sex, and then a trans human identifies with the opposite gender to their sex. The part of the brain that's involved in sexual dimorphia and gender identity behaves similarly in cis women and trans women, cis men and trans men. This part of the brain is also responsible for long-term trauma, so hypervigilance, freeze response, as well as how we feel about novelty. So while the dimorphic sexual difference brain chemistry appears around puberty, trans humans report cross-gender identity from childhood. And this is one of my hills to die on. Children voice their gender between 2 and 4 years old. This dramatically disproportionate statistic regarding suicide in transgender youth is a direct reflection of children's communities' inability to respect them. Gender roles, media normalization, family values, we all want to fit in. So when we want to fit in, our brains are just doing our job. And being exiled from our community is a matter of survival, according to Human Brain. It's just that the modern community is a result of very recent history. So please don't give yourself a hard time for wanting approval.